the hotter it gets, the better it gets, the colder it gets, the worse it gets. This is not politically correct, but if you haven't noticed by now, they did a poll 2 weeks ago where they found that 80% of Americans now hate political correctness. I'm one of the 80%, if you haven't guessed already. All right, anyway, China. They went downhill. After the fall of the Han Dynasty, China went through a period of chaos called the Era of Six Dynasties. I don't mean these dynasties ruled one after another. They all six were in charge of different parts of China at the same time. And for once in its history, China was not united. All right. Then, eventually, we're going to spend this chapter talking about three main dynasties. Well, the Tang, the Song, and the Yuan. The Sui, first of all, there was the Sui. They didn't last long. Now, your book gives, at least if you have the latest edition of the book, it gives pronunciations, and I'll be the first to admit I'm not pronouncing some of these words right, and if you know any better, your input is welcome. I've had Chinese students in my class who know more Chinese history than I do, that's fine, but I'll teach you what I know as best I know it. All right, anyway, this period of chaos, this six dynasties, a period of chaos, was to last 400 years. This coincides with what we call the Dark Ages of Europe. Dark Ages, when learning came to a halt, a standstill, when few books were written, few written records were around, when all of mankind was, well, everything had been better in generations before than it was now. And even in North America, the Olmec dynasty came to an end. As for, that was in Mexico, but in what is today the United States and Canada, we know that during this time there were Indian civilizations arising. Some of them had cities as large as 20 and 30,000 people, then they collapsed. Another civilization, a big city would rise in its place and it would collapse. We know this through archaeology. So,
You said
all right,
the Dark Ages of Europe were when there were little books.
say that again.
The Dark Ages of Europe is when there were little written records.
Very little written records. Yeah, that's why they're called dark. It's not that they were, well, actually, they may have been dark to know because some people believe the sun cooled down. And again, others will try to argue with this, but a cooling down of the sun would explain a whole lot. It would explain why the barbarian people felt like they had to move, and why that civilization did not come to, well, it came to an end in some places. In North America, eventually civilization was to come to an end. And in parts of Southeast Asia, which we just talked about, civilization came to an end there. But civilization was hard hit everywhere, and Europe almost became tribal, like the American Indians did. Europe almost became tribal. Of all the countries I've mentioned, whether it be India, North America, Europe, Africa, the one that actually survived the best was China. Now, in the short run, and in the long run, China fell by the wayside and wound up lagging behind. But in the short run, I'm talking about the period of time from 500 CE to 1500 CE, that 1,000-year period. China fared better than every place else in the world. Now, again, I want to open up this section on China the way I always open China. The Chinese were the people who came the closest, folk, to bursting out of their seams and overspreading the whole globe. But for a little bit more, China would have put man on the moon, and we'd have colonies on the moon right now, and I might even be holding this classroom on Mars. I'm not being funny, really. the Chinese folk were on the verge. They had it in their grasp, but they threw it away. They had what in their grasp? I mean, they had learning, they had scientific advancement, they had the beginnings, and lost it. But they almost did, but they didn't. All right. China, again, we can't imagine, but if you lived in Italy, you'd look back to the time when Italy once ruled the whole Mediterranean. If you lived in Macedonia, every Macedonian is an expert in Alexander the Great. If you lived in Greece, you look back to the time of Socrates, the time when Greek civilization dominated the Western world. We in America can't look back when it's admit to us our greatest time is right now. But China looked back to its glorious past and thinking someday we'll achieve what we once had. Again, when the Han Dynasty fell, one of these 6 dynasties, if not more of them, were some barbaric nomadic people. You might ask, well, where was the Great Wall? It was there, but a wall by itself won't quite do the job. You have to have an army that's big enough to scatter all over the wall, and China didn't have it during this time. So they found a way to breach the wall, break down the gates, and come across. And nomadic people from outside came in. Again, folks, this is in your book, and it's a repeat of what I just said about India. And when we come to Europe, believe me, I've already mentioned, I'm going to talk about how that nomadic people, uncivilized barbarians, and yes, I'm talking about my own ancestors because I'm a Scotsman, the name claim is Scotch, and my own ancestors were uncivilized, and I'm also part German, and we're talking about the Germanic people this time were uncivilized, but they almost destroyed civilization. Again, this is relevant here in the Halloween on 2018. It's still an issue. All right. Nomadic peoples took charge of much of northern China. Southern China was disunited, still ruled by its own people, but disunited. During this time, Confucianism was largely replaced by Taoism and Buddhism. Yeah, 2 religions. All right. Now, it didn't make much of an impact, but I'm going to mention anyway. It is known that Christian missionaries did go to China as early as 100 CE. You know, it's 70 years after Jesus left the world. Some Christian missionaries did arrive in China. They made practically no significant headway. And this was to remain true to a large extent all down through history. Christian missionaries in China have been a constant, but they did not convert very many Chinese. Buddhism was looked on as being a foreign religion just as Christianity was. Now this is ironic because the Chinese rejected foreign religions for 2,000-3,000 years. Then in 1949, the year I was born, they embraced a foreign religion, namely communism. And I had a pupil say, communism is not a religion.
No.
Okay, say it if you want to. The way Karl Marx taught it, well, Karl Marx believed it was inevitable. Inevitability makes it a religion. Again, believe what you will. Karl Marx said communism will take over because it's inevitable. If you believe in inevitability, then that's a religion. All right, do you see the logic I'm using? If you don't believe in religion, nothing is inevitable. Okay, anyway, communism took over. Call it what you will. It's a worldview, and communism though was a foreign worldview. But anyway, Taoism and Buddhism were more spiritual than Confucianism. And your book almost seems to be saying that Taoism and Buddhism contributed to the decline of the Chinese, that Confucianism was a better religion because it was a philosophy and not a religion. I think that a whole lot of factors influenced China's decline. Well, long about the year 1000 or so, the Sui unified China. The era of 6 dynasties that lasted 400 years was over. The Sui had started off, like so many dynasties did, started off great with a good ruler. Then they got a tyrannical ruler. But anyway, the Sui dynasty, though, is mainly remembered because they built the Grand Canal. The Grand Canal united the Yellow River and the Yangtze River. Now, I mentioned, you should have learned China's 2 rivers already. The Grand Canal joined these 2 rivers. And very important because you may not realize that canals, all you need is just one old horse that might even be half lame, and he can pull a barge that weighs several tons. Or if you want to really, you can put 2 horses, one on one side of the canal and one on the other. I mean, the horse, of course, has to stay on the land, on the edge of the canal. But one or 2 horses can pull a barge that weighs several tons. I mean, they're not very fast at it, but they can. And again, it promotes trade. So this helped unite China. These two rulers, father and son, unified China, built a Grand Canal. The son was tyrannical. And when he died, the people were glad he was gone. They did not allow his son to take over the throne. His dynasty came to an end. Then came a new dynasty. The Chinese always look back to this one. This was one of the great ones. Lasted 300 years. These people, the Tang, they made a lot of internal improvements. Now, something else they did. They expanded China to the territory that includes most of modern China today. They conquered Tibet. Now, this is highly controversial because this is, right here on this campus, in this front parking lot, right? Just, okay, you have to walk a little ways to it. But the parking lot in front of the E building, there used to be a car that was owned by one of the professors that said, "Free Tibet." Modern day China conquered Tibet, and a lot of persons wanted Tibet freed. The leader of Tibet was the Dalai Lama, still is, and our presidents would not talk to Dalai Lama because they did not want to offend the Chinese. So again, this is an issue. These issues that went on back then are still around. But Tibet was conquered. I personally have a little bit of interest in Tibet because when I was a kid, I'd read a lot of books about Mars. And they'd say the place on Earth that's most like Mars is probably Tibet because it had really thin air, and yet Tibet had a lot of life in it. You didn't see it at first because the life remained kind of hidden underground or behind the bushes. But now they say that most places like life is far northern Canada because it's so cold. But and all right, I'll put it to you this way. One of my childhood heroes was from Tibet, named Dr. Strange. A year ago, they made a movie about him. And I didn't see the other, but they say that Dr. Strange figured prominently in the Avengers movie. All right, some of you might know what I'm talking about. And regrettably, I did not see the Avengers movie, but I hope to buy it. But my children saw it, and they told me Dr. Strange was part of that. But anyway, Dr. Strange had his roots in Tibet. All right, yeah, some of you know that already, yes. So anyway, Tibet was, even at that time, looked on as being a land of magic and wizardry. And I would get letters when I was a young man written from Tibet saying that there are people living in Tibet who are 130 years old, but they look like they're 20. I asked a Chinese man, he said, you can never document when these people were actually born. So anyway, I was not about to embrace Daoism. All right. But now, they did not actually conquer Korea, but they put Korea to tribute. And they made, in other words, basically they conquered Tibet. Tibet forced Korea to pay tribute, but there was one area that they did not conquer. By the way, we're going to learn they also conquered Vietnam, held it for a while. But they didn't know that. Pardon me, they held Vietnam. They did not conquer it. Vietnam was already
So they conquered Korea?
They conquered Tibet. They put Korea to tribute. They held Vietnam. Did not let Vietnam get its independence. They had not conquered Vietnam. Vietnam was already conquered. All right. But there was one place they didn't conquer, and that was Japan. The Japanese resisted them. No. Japan, though, copied a lot of Chinese culture. They visited China and picked up some of the good things they saw in China, including the civil service exam. Japan copied the civil service exam and copied a few other things from Japan. It is believed that their capital, which I'm going to write its name down, had 2 million people living in it. And folk, that is a lot for a city that doesn't have running water and didn't have bulldozers to dig sewer systems and whatever, drainage systems. 2 million, getting 2 million people together is a feat in itself. But, and also didn't have trucks to carry in food to the city every day. I mean, today, we have cities that are a lot more people than that. We have trucks, we have bulldozers, we have trench diggers, and things like this. Otherwise, the cities would become uninhabitable. I want to say this too. Anyone like me who was alive 50 years ago, you visit the city of Atlanta 50 years ago, you could hardly breathe the air. Come back 50 years later and the air is a whole lot cleaner, even though we have a whole lot more cars. So the next time you're required to get a pollution check on your car, be glad of it. It's made the air a lot. When I went to Mexico, 10% of the cars we have, and you can't breathe the air. At least when I was there, you couldn't. Jamaica, go to the capital city, had the same problem. Now that might not be as true as it was when I was there 40 years ago, but there is a lot of pollution in Jamaica at one time. Is it still that way, or?
Yeah.
It's gotten better.
Yeah.
It's gotten better. Well,
It got better.
I'll tell you though, the most polluted place on earth today is China itself. All right, China itself, and my wife has been there, my 2 daughters have been there, one daughter twice, and the air is very difficult to breathe. Anyway.
Because of pollution.
Cars.
Now here's what happened to Tang. They had problems with internal strife within their court. And this is, it's just, you read this about China over and over and over again. Corruption in government. And this turned the people against them. The court fighting among themselves. A lot of your local people started ruling without regard to the central government. And folk, repeating what was said earlier, a bunch of nomad, barbaric people came in and overthrew the Tang dynasty and brought about chaos that lasted a few generations, 2 or 3 generations. Now, something I did not mention about the Tang, but I'm going to mention it. Well, no, I'm going to wait. The Song dynasty came next. And I associate the Song with socialism, and here's why. The Tang and Song did the same thing. The Song dynasty took land from the rich and gave it to the poor. The result was the Song dynasty collapsed. The whole scheme did not work. And folk, I challenge any of you to find any instance where this has worked. There's been several times this has been tried, where that you take wealth from the rich and redistribute it among the poor. It sounds so great. Robin Hood is a hero among folk people because he rob the rich to feed the poor. I want to tell you something. Robin Hood, this is going to sound cold, would have done humanity more good if he'd have robbed the poor and given that money to the rich. The rich would have made the poor richer. If you follow my logic. The richer the rich get, the richer I'll get. I say, let the rich move forward and get richer still. I mean, I know there's snakes. But I was at a steak show one time. Let me tell you something, a good steak show one time. And this man, Ross Solomon, name said, as much as we hate it, once we've killed them all, we'll miss them once they're all gone. We'll miss them. We realize how much good they've done. Yes, and when the communists come in and get rid of all the rich people, guess what? The whole society falls to zero. Anyway, the Song dynasty were a socialistic dynasty. They lost Tibet. They largely lost Vietnam. Then the Mongolians threatened. So instead of fighting the Mongols, they moved south. Their army was weak. I mean, folk typical of socialistic people, they don't like to admit we have to have an army or our enemies are going to come in and take over everything we have. Their army was weak, and guess what? This word right here, Mongolian, the Yuan, Genghis Khan came in. His name's not still up there. Anyway, Mongolia. Genghis Khan came in and destroyed the Yuan dynasty. No, probably the Song. He was Yuan. Pardon me. He destroyed the Song dynasty. Genghis Khan came in. Now, I'm about to close, but I was teaching this class a couple years ago, and one with a young man who was socialist. I said, I know you're about to say that socialism was the problem. I said, I'm guilty as charged. I don't mind that. Then, I mean, I finally got him and said, okay, what they did when they took over, they started torturing and killing everybody in sight. And they destroyed and killed and hunted down like they were animals all the high ups of nobility.
That's the Song.
No. The Yuan dynasty did this to the Song and the other people that they came in contact with. Folk, I mean, I'm making it sound so tame. Okay, the Yuan came in and destroyed the Song. You don't realize how brutal it was. Genghis Khan was an extremely brutal man who loved killing, who enjoyed killing people. And your book will mention that, by the way, if you read about him. Anyway, if the Song, I mean, folk, this is one time, I will close with this, I promise you. One time when the civilized greatly outnumbered the uncivilized. Genghis Khan never had more than 100,000 men in his army. Oh, wait, they were tough. I mean, they were brutal. The Chinese had tens of millions, 10 million or so people. If they could have got together a trained army, I know. I mean, you might tell me how great and wonderful Genghis Khan, but Genghis Khan was human. He could have been whipped. If the Chinese could have got together 200,000 or 300,000 really good, highly trained men, Genghis Khan would never have invaded them. Instead, they let the military lapse, and the general committed suicide rather than face them. I mean, he knew he didn't have an army, and the fault lay with the emperor's army. Everybody have